I think that the conversation about Israel has moved from speculation to conclusion, hasn't it? Benjamin Netanyahu's course has damaged the country's standing in the world. It has diminished the support and affection that many others in the world feel for Israel. And it has happened really, it's been sacrificed really at the altar of his vanity and ambition. The United Nations Security Council passed its first ceasefire resolution last night, in which it demanded that the fighting halt for the Muslim holy month of Ramadan. The United States abstained and declined to specify a timeline for the release of the hostages kidnapped on October the 7th, which suggests that they finally recognise the it's very important to get the words right. Not necessarily the impossibility, but they recognise the jeopardy that Netanyahu's attempts to tie together the destruction of Hamas, the release of all the hostages, with the cessation of hostilities against Palestinian civilians, it was doomed never to happen. He's cancelled a visit by Israeli officials to Washington. David Cameron, it's extraordinary the angle that the Daily Telegraph takes on this. The United Kingdom helped pass the first UN Security Council resolution for calling for a ceasefire in the Israel-Gaza conflict. I'm going to say that again, actually, because many people feel, rightly or wrongly, that the United Kingdom, that the Conservative government and the Labour opposition have done too little too late when it comes to calling for ceasefire in Gaza. And yet, when they finally get around to doing it, the Daily Telegraph chooses to report it as a Tory backlash as Britain votes for unconditional Gaza ceasefire. Extraordinary, really, to reflect that this is a report built upon the idea that 4 Conservative MPs challenged Lord Cameron behind closed doors at a 1922 committee meeting. So the United Kingdom actually endorses a UN resolution that passes calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. And the Daily Telegraph chooses to lead on the idea, or on the news, in inverted commas, that 4 Tory MPs complained to the UK Foreign Secretary about that decision. It's actually bizarre now where this story has gone. And the reason why it is so bizarre is because people can't make head nor tail of what's happening now, because they believed so much of what they were told about what was happening then. If you were listening to this program, you're probably all right, because we have managed, and it hasn't always been easy, but we have managed to successfully record repulsion, profound repulsion. I don't even, there are no words to describe our reaction to the events of October the 7th. Unqualified. Possibly some people were unhappy with the lack of qualification of support for Israel and its right to respond. And then it started slowly and then gathered pace, fear that what Benjamin Netanyahu was doing was going to cause untold carnage in Gaza and untold damage to Israel. I have to confess that I never thought Donald Trump would publicly come out with that argument. But I suppose even a stopped clock is right twice a day. Joe Biden has gone there. The United Nations went there some time ago, although the constitutional setup of the United Nations meant that motions could be blocked, most recently, of course, by Russia and by China. But there we are now. The United Nations has called for an unconditional ceasefire in Gaza. And Benjamin Netanyahu is throwing his toys out of his pram. He's also waving goodbye to one of the parties that propped up his coalition, a right-wing political party that was propping up his coalition. America abstained. So that described in Israel by Netanyahu's officials as hurting Israel's war effort. So we've reached another moment. We've reached another grim moment in this horrible story. And it's the moment at which Israel is on its own. Completely isolated now. It's gone from having the, you could say extraordinary, perhaps unique levels of support. In America and the UK chiefly, it was never quite the same in other countries, but you could probably say Europe and America. Frankly, extraordinary levels of support in Europe and America, certainly if you looked at it through a Middle Eastern lens. And Benjamin Netanyahu has rendered Israel alone on the world stage. And that, listen, even if you don't have sympathy for Israel, even if you have questions about its right to exist, in which case I think you need to give your head a wobble personally, but for the Jewish state to have been cut loose from the international community by the Israeli Prime Minister, I mean, I've got no skin whatsoever in this game, but I find that quite scary. That's what Netanyahu's done. And, having been able to see it coming is no comfort whatsoever, having been able to describe to you that this was bound to happen, unless something pretty significant and almost impossible to describe, almost indescribable happened. This was bound to happen. This trajectory has been clear since probably November or December of last year. And I know I do sometimes need to offload on you. Sometimes it probably seems a bit daft or a bit self-indulgent, but sometimes I do need to offload on you. Sometimes it's really difficult conducting these conversations. I can joke about Idiot's Corner, but there are some accusations that are not caring about dead Palestinian babies or hating Jews. That some of the accusations that come in, I hope they don't stop me from having the conversations. But there are some sort of allegations or accusations that do hurt, and some people who have public profiles have done it as well. I don't think it would be appropriate to single them out by name, although I reserve the right to do that, and I may change my mind. And I'll use my public platform to call them out in the way that they use theirs to call me out. But this stuff resonates. This stuff lands, and the idea that you would be called anti-Semitic for simply explaining that what is now happening was going to happen is extraordinary. It's like calling somebody anti-Semitic for explaining that the sun was going to come up tomorrow. This has been inevitable since it became clear that there was no answer to the question of how much is too much. And sometimes a phone-in show can seem a bit simplistic or it can seem a bit crass, but it's not, When we get it right together, because I can nothing without you, when we get it right together, we can distill really complicated issues right down to the crucial questions, to the bare bones of the issue. And that was the question that we probably should have spent even more time examining 3-4 months ago. How much will be too much? Because the people ringing me to tell me, or in terms, although they'd never say it quite explicitly, people would ring me and essentially refuse to acknowledge the notion that there was a possibility of too much being too much. There can't be too much. We have to carry on until Hamas has been eradicated and the hostages have been released. And you'd say, yes, but you almost begin to sound like a coercive partner in that situation. It's like, I won't stop hitting you until something over which you have no control happens. The people being killed in the Gaza Strip have absolutely no agency in the question of whether or not the hostages get released. And Hamas being destroyed as you continue to arguably undertake the biggest imaginable recruiting program in the history of the Middle East seems to be an utterly unachievable goal. So you're left today with a conclusion that has been clear for some time, but which I have been reluctant to articulate. And that is that I don't think Netanyahu was telling the truth. I think that the fact that today's or last night's call for a ceasefire is unconditional is the point at which the world has recognised, or the world has acknowledged, it may have recognised it long ago, acknowledged that the Israeli conditions are unachievable, that Netanyahu's conditions for cessation of hostilities are unachievable. It is an unscorable goal. It will never happen. God, you have to hope the hostages get released, but the eradication of Hamas? Not a chance. And how many hostages have been killed as a consequence of the bombardment of Gaza? We will probably never know. So if you struggle to understand what that meant, you were right. But if you'd said so out loud, you'd have been called anti-Semitic. Until today, when everybody's saying it. I mean, literally everybody. America abstaining, and the UK voting for a Security Council resolution at the United Nations demanding a ceasefire, an unconditional ceasefire for the duration of the holy month of Ramadan. I presume that Israel will ignore it, and I don't know what that will mean or what that will signify or what that will entail moving forward. But I do know that that is probably the loneliest Israel has been on the world stage, and I haven't got the history to say this with certainty, but certainly in all the time that I've been doing this job, this is the loneliest Israel has been on the world stage since the country was founded. And it's all on Netanyahu. How do you process that? I think the question is, how does it end? 0345 606 0973. And this, I think, will demand degrees of knowledge and understanding that are a little bit above average. How does it end? How does it end? Because you could see Netanyahu continuing down this path if he retained the support that he presumably was relying on. Although, again, I mean, did he know that this was going to happen? Surely he's been warned. Biden would have warned him publicly. Never mind what was been going on in private. Chuck Schumer, the most senior Jewish politician in the whole of the United States of America, used the word pariah 2 weeks ago. I did look, sometimes I pat myself on the back for correctly predicting the direction of traffic in political affairs. A, this is too important to be engaging in that kind of conduct. And B, it was really, really obvious, unless your scarf was tied so tightly around your neck that you couldn't see the wood for the trees. This was so obviously going to happen. Netanyahu was so obviously not going to change course, partly because to do so would have been opening himself up to not just defenestration, but prosecution in Israel. Longer he can sustain hostilities, the longer he can evade justice, on really simple terms. Loading his cabinet with people who call for things like nuclear bombs to be dropped on the Gaza Strip. How can anybody today be surprised by where we've ended up? Except perhaps passionate supporters of Israel, the my country right or wrong level of support, who must be reeling today to discover that Netanyahu has cut you loose from the international support structure that has sustained you for decades. So how does it end? 0345 606 0973. And I don't know if you've been four square behind Netanyahu up until this point, whether you still are or not. I don't know whether you're ready to talk about this yet, or indeed whether you're ready to acknowledge reality, or whether you are in a form of denial about what he has done to your country, or what he has done to Israel. You may be dual citizenship. You may have a sort of filial or religious affiliation to Israel rather than a citizenship one. But you know what I mean by that phrase. Look at what he's done now. Look at what he's done. So how does it end? And also, how does it feel? How does it feel? 0345 60973. The latest resolution restored the word permanent to the original submission and was passed due to no objections. The chamber in New York broke into applause after the vote. So that, in a sense, is the whole world clapping. The call for a ceasefire, which until relatively recently many supporters of Israel would describe as somehow offering up support for Hamas. It's weird, isn't it? How quickly the scales can fall from your eyes sometimes. How have we ended up here? And how on earth does it end?